Hello and welcome to the third installment of this video introduction to visual design. This is the last video that I'm going to have created for the class, and if you haven't done so already, I would recommend jumping and checking out the introduction video and the visual design elements video before you actually watch this one. We're going to be building on some of what we've talked about already in those two video clips here in a little bit more detail. So you'll kind of want to know that stuff. It's going to be there implicitly, but you'll kind of want to know that stuff before you go and watch this video. So this is, again, the third one. We're going to be talking about visual design principles in this video. So basically what visual design principles help us do are they're sort of they help guide us a little bit in terms of what we're doing in visual design. So when we talked about visual design elements, we were really talking about, what are the basic building blocks, what are the pieces that we use in order to create a design, and here we're starting to talk about what starts to make design look good, as opposed to, we can use the same elements and create a bad visual design, or something that doesn't really look that appealing, but the design principles can help guide us in terms of creating something that's a little bit more interesting. Also, it really helps to build structure and order in what we're creating, helps create some sort of logical cohesion around what we're doing as opposed to just randomly placing elements on the page or in the design. And it's based on what we expect in terms of when we see an image, when we analyze and break down an image, what do we expect it to look like? And these visual design principles are built on that. They're actually derived from principles that have come through and been created as a result of something known as Gestalt psychology. So a lot of these principles have to deal with how do we actually see an image, and how can we sort of essentially help guide a person through whatever visual design that we're creating based on those principles. Okay, now there's a couple things that design principles are not going to do for us. First of all, they are not going to be step-by-step procedures of how we can actually create good-looking designs. That's not what they're effective for. They're sort of better guides so that we can analyze what we're creating as we're creating and saying, okay, well, how are we following these principles? How are they coming into play? You still need to be able to follow what just looks good. You start to create that as you gain experience. So in this class, early on, you're not going to have a whole lot of experience. You have some experience because you've seen images all your life, so you know what looks good and what doesn't look good in general. But as you start to get involved with the creation of those, you'll refine that even further. The other thing is a lot of these design principles are also open to interpretation. So again, they're not hard and fast rules. They're not very specific, but they're much more generally defined and generally applicable to what you're creating. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is to break a design principle. Not all the times, but in some cases where our expectations are set up in a certain way that we're expecting to see something in a particular way, breaking the design principle can actually make it a little bit more engaging and more interesting and appealing to people, to your audience. But before we actually jump into that, we need to know what those rules are first. Now, there's going to be 7 design principles we're going to be talking about. The first are what is known as CARP design principles, and we'll go through those in a second. We'll be talking about visual flow, we'll be talking about visual balance, and we'll talk about visual hierarchy, which really allows us to tie everything together, all the other design principles together. Okay, so to begin with, let's talk about these CARP design principles. There's 4 of them. The CARP stands for contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity. Now, they're usually grouped together as CARP because sometimes when people start with the bare minimums of design principles, these are the very 4 basic ones that they talk about. Let's start with contrast. Contrast is potentially maybe the most important design principle amongst all of them. Contrast is essentially using opposing elements in relationship to each other somehow. And generally when this happens, what it does is visually it draws the audience's attention in some way. This has a strong connection with both emphasis and importance, and also ordering the information. Contrast can occur in a number of different things. The most common are probably things such as color, so contrasting colors in the image, for example, white and black. Could be shape, could be the kind of line or alignment that we created, happens in motion, the amount of space around things, pretty much anything. Okay, so take a look at this image. I want you to focus on what are the contrasting elements here? Where are they occurring? And pause the video. Okay, so let me tell you about what I'm seeing. First of all, I'm seeing contrast between color. We got white and black, and then we invert the text color. This inversion actually helps so that we can actually easily read the black text in the white background and the white text in the black background. We've got size differences. Again, has sort of tells us there's something with regard to the importance of the larger words. We've got orientation differences. So some are horizontally, some of the words are horizontal, some are vertical. In this case, this probably has more to do with just trying to create a heart in some sort of way in the design. And then lastly, what we have is a difference, a contrast in positions. We've got the words having to do more with love on the left side and words having to do more with hate on the right side. Okay, we're going to look at another example. This is going to be a very quick, rapid example, but I want you to try and figure out how many of the words on the next page you can actually read. Okay, so now take a second, pause the video, and write down what you think you saw. So just take 1 second. Okay, so I'll read the text from beginning to end. It says, "I am first," and then there's a space between it. And then it says, "This text demonstrates the contrast between this dense, small text and the simple text on the left. The eye is naturally drawn to the block of text to the left because it stands apart. In some sense, the eye gravitates to something more simple before moving on to something that will be more complex, requiring more cognitive resources to process this dense prose. Using white space effectively can create immediate effects." So I would guess that most people got "I am first." You might have gotten a couple of the words out of the other denser paragraph. Definitely, when we've got that much text there, it just becomes too much to process all of it. The one other thing that I wanted to point out is that I don't know if anyone noticed, but the text actually gets cut off at the end. Near immediate effects. I would be surprised if anyone actually read down that far. But, there it is. Okay, so that was the C in contrast. Let's talk about the A. A stands for alignment here. So basically what alignment tells us is, essentially, we look for lines in whatever we're looking at visually. These lines can help us to determine relationships between both like and unlike objects and symbols and forms. They can help us distinguish direction, importance, categorization, and it can even help us link physically separate paragraphs when we're reading a piece of text. So let's take a look at an example of this. This doesn't have to do with importance or relationship, but it helps us to at least group lines of text together. So we're able to read blocks of text even along arbitrary lines. The key is to make sure that the eye can follow along the line you're using. So what we have here is we have this green form that's helping to guide us. But we don't even need that green form. We can even read it when there is no visual guide. Our eyes can naturally fill in the gap where that line is if we need it. Here's another example. I want you to take a little bit of time to analyze this yourself. So take a look at this, pause this video, and try and establish how alignment is coming into play. Either they're using the alignment somehow in the organization or they're not using it. Okay, let me talk to you about how I see that they're using it. So the first key one that stands out to us, we're pretty familiar with, is the headline itself has its own alignment. It's drawn out, so here we've got contrast again, but it's separated out from the rest of the body text as something of importance, as something being sort of at the head, the key of this whole document. We've got an alignment for the body that we're following, which is sort of helping us guide it. We follow along through that paragraph to where the little man in the hat image is. We also can see an alignment, even though it's not aligned along the alignment, but we can see the image of the woman in the center of the alignment down at the bottom. Okay, so while the left hand has really strong alignments that we can follow, the right hand side is a little less clear. First of all, with the man at the top of the image, we see a line coming across the middle of the page. It doesn't really have much to do with anything. And furthermore, the text that's there is kind of randomly placed in relationship to that. Furthermore, we have that "Are you ready?" text. That's pretty, it's kind of off in its own separate space. It's not aligned with really anything else. It's off from that right edge of the image. And lastly, we can see something where it's breaking alignment a little bit, but it is using what's there, where the king is actually using the space created by the form of the rest of the text. So here we're actually creating some sort of a novel alignment because of the shapes created in the image. Okay, so let's look at yet another example of alignment. Here we can see that we can follow any line regardless of shape, color, or separations. We visually fill in the gaps to take this line up at the top. We follow the green line. We go through the physical separations. We switch into an orange circle, and it follows us right to the center point of that circle. Okay, so we've been through contrast, we've been through alignment. The R in CARP stands for repetition. One of the key things about human psychology is we are outstanding pattern matchers. We do it all the time. We do it with faces, we do it with textures, we do it with any kinds of images that we see. We are just all about pattern matching. So anything that falls into this category can include things like logos, taglines and mottos, shapes, forms, and colors, and any related sort of symbols along those lines. One last thing about repetition is it's a great way to build branding and identity, as we'll show in this next example. Okay, so looking at this image, what we see here is essentially using different identity elements to help, through repetition, create a consistency across multiple documents. So in the top left-hand corner, we could say, okay, this is some sort of a business card. We've got some sort of the name in a certain typeface. We have a symbol that can form the logo, for example, and some other kinds of features. On the next middle slide, what we have is essentially what is a letterhead with a watermark. We're using those symbols again, they're just faded out. On the top right, we could say maybe this would be a billboard, and what we're doing is we're starting to decompose and deconstruct some of those identity elements to help sort of play into the message that we're talking about, follow the dots. So we deconstruct the dots. And lastly, we can, at the bottom left, it could be a website. And we can just deconstruct and reform that message.